Welcome to another We Virginians Commonwealth conversation, where we look at the impacts of coronavirus on the country and in particular on Virginia. I am Ryan Gilchrist, a journalist and editor from Yorktown, Virginia. We're talking today about childhood education, specifically early childhood education. We have a couple of great guests on with us. First, we have Diane Umstead. She's the executive director of Smart Beginnings Virginia Peninsula, which seeks to provide services to prepare children in Hampton and Newport News for kindergarten and life. Diane, welcome.
Thank you for the invitation and for me being here.
And we also have Kathy Glazer. She's the president of the Virginia Early Childhood Foundation, working to make sure every child in Virginia is prepared for school. Kathy, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you both. As always, I have my co-host, Marisa Porto. She is executive in residence at Hampton University, the former newspaper editor and publisher. Hello, Marisa.
Hello, nice to see you all this morning.
We have two experts on early childhood education and a crisis that's currently impacting that world in a very meaningful way. What would you like to know?
Let's start with, I understand that 45% of the state's child care centers have closed since the coronavirus pandemic began in this area. I'm asking you what you think about how it has affected early childhood education in the state. And we can start with Diane.
Sure. I can talk about what's happening locally, and actually it's devastating because the landscape has changed completely for our early childhood professionals that have been providing high quality, safe and nurturing education to our young children. We have about 308 child development sites, and these are licensed family child care homes, child care centers, faith-based nursery schools that usually operate, and less than 40% of them are even able to operate right now. And part of that is because of the new standards for health and safety, the group sizes of 10 or less people, children and adults in a room, the extra cleaning and what goes into that. And I don't know about you, but if you raise young children, there's no way you can keep them 6 feet apart.
Right.
So just from a very specific standpoint, here on the peninsula, in the 7 areas that we serve, the supply has dwindled. And so then what happens for families is that they have to piece it together with their family, neighbors, and friends. Obviously, we're very lucky here with Smart Beginnings and the work that we've done in the community to convene partners around solutions. And I'll say that that's one of the things that we did right away was convene our partners in business and philanthropy and faith and nonprofits and schools and hospitals to say what is happening and how do we need to respond for the families, especially of essential workers. And so we've been able to provide a lot of information to the HR departments in our cities and to the hospitals about who is open, how many children they can take, what age, and of course we've been learning about any special concerns that those providers have and trying to meet those needs as well.
Okay. And do we have any thoughts about what's happening around the state? Is that pretty similar?
You want me to jump in?
Yes.
Sure. Thank you.
Kathy.
Yes, what Diane is describing is, kind of a good example and kind of a microcosm of what's happening more broadly across the state. You mentioned a percentage, actually about 65% of center-based programs have closed. About 25% of those that are based in homes, so family child care, are closed. So there's definitely a little bit more of a leaning toward continuing to utilize those services that are characterized by smaller numbers, and so feels a little bit safer in terms of reducing the risk of the spread of the virus. I think that it's, one of the things that this crisis has laid bare are two things really highlighting the essential nature of childcare and the dependence of our workforce on childcare to be able to get to work and to be dependable workers. So in many ways, the market-based childcare industry is the business that powers business. And so we've really understood now how critical it is, and especially in this environment for our essential personnel, which spans across a wide array of different types of business and industry, to be able to have the care they need for their children to get to work. I think it also has laid bare the fragility of this industry and of this system. And so it's kind of a two-sided coin of realizing how important childcare is, and yet how the current system that we utilize for childcare needs to be bolstered and improved.
So when you talk about bolstering and improving the childcare, the childcare industry, what do you mean by that in the virus era?
Yeah, so I'll start and then certainly turn it over to my colleague Diane. I think that it is really, without at all diminishing the devastation and the challenge for everybody of this pandemic crisis, I think it's also provided a real opportunity for us to think differently. We can't go back to the way things were. And in some cases, and in some ways, that gives us a perfect kind of a way of rethinking and reimagining. And so we are pulling together a task force of individuals who can really start to think about how, even now, before the state thinks about phasing in and getting back to work, how can we start now to make sure that we are taking steps and reintroducing a reimagined frame for the way we think about early childhood education and childcare, and really begin to implement policies and practices that are more sensitive to needing to have a really durable system of care that is sensitive to parents' preferences and behavior and the way they make choices, and to other sort of localized needs. And we'll turn it to Diane to speak a little bit more to this issue from a local perspective.
Yeah, I was thinking about what one of our early childhood professionals shared with us here, because we've been able to resource them heavily around more than what we already give to them by way of training and technical assistance and coaching, so that they are providing the highest quality of early childhood education that's possible. So one of our providers was just saying how she is so appreciative that we've kept them in the loop, because we could have stopped doing everything. It would have been sort of an excuse, I guess you could say, but we carried on, and we held special webinars here on the Peninsula to help them understand the business aspects of making sure that they could sustain either now or into the future. We let them know about various funding, including the stimulus package that came to Virginia to be used specifically for childcare sites that remained open for essential workers. And one of our providers was just saying, now more than ever, we need to have secure and safe spaces for our kids. And so that's what I would say right now is, yes, now more than ever, there is such a critical need for high quality early childhood education. And the system that we are trying to put into place is not like a school system. It is fragile. And yet parents are relying on childcare and preschool experiences because they know that when a child gets the best in the first 5 years of life, they are better when they enter school. They can succeed beyond just the basics. I think I'd like to also just talk a little bit about parent choice. I mean, it's one of the things that we're learning is that during the pandemic, families chose not to put their kids into group care settings, even though social emotional experiences are important for their kids. They just felt that their families and children would be safer. And so they were able to piece together the different kinds of care. So there's going to be a new landscape when we go back, and will we be able to support families in their choice and in their true preferences? And the last, I'll just say, our early childhood workforce is essential, but they have not been paid in an essential way. They are not paid like teachers, and it is a system that sometimes teachers that are in child development centers are living on a subsistence level themselves. So we do have an opportunity to correct even that as we rise up to say that early childhood education is important and the professionals providing it are equally as important.
You mentioned earlier, anyone who's spent time around children knows it's impossible to keep them away from each other. And most of these facilities, and there wouldn't be any reason for them to have done this previously, are in no way designed for social distancing or keeping any distance. In fact, many are relatively small spaces. Given the uncertainty of the timeline, not really knowing how quickly people are going to return to normal, if normal is even a thing anymore, how do you address putting students back into facilities and maintaining that social distance in a facility that was not designed for that? What can be done?
Well, I actually think that's why some of the sites ended up closing down, because they felt that it was their responsibility to provide the most healthy and safest way to care for children. One of the things that we've been able to do here, and also other smart beginnings across the state, is to ascertain what their needs are while they are providing care. And in many cases, they did not have PPE. They did not even have cleaning supplies to do the necessary sanitization. All of them had stepped up their efforts to sanitize. But we have done not only use some resources that we had that we could reallocate to purchase supplies, but have had some sponsorships and others that have joined in. And we've been able to provide gloves and masks and bleach and hand soap and paper towels. We partnered with Riverside Paper Supply, and they were really into this. They were like, oh, anything for the kids. So that was another really great story. At the same time, we provided some webinars on things that teachers in those groups of 10 or less could do with children to make sure that kids stayed a distance. And we provided a few little kits with like puzzles and other manipulatives and things like that, and just resource them even more. Kathy, have you heard other stories across the state that you might share here?
I think, Ryan, the question that you asked raises for me more of a, kind of future, forward, wondering about how the current situation, which is not ideal, but again, childcare is considered essential personnel. Childcare workers are essential personnel. And so we've had to cobble together a way for care to continue. And again, the vast majority have closed, just like K-12, for the same reasons that K-12 was, ordered, mandated to be closed through the rest of the school year. But because of the essential nature of this work, there was this attempt to come up with the criteria to try to reduce the risk, which is no more than 10 individuals in a space, attempting to, within reason, try to do the social distancing, the disinfection. I think that it really, when we think about how we'll get back to, the new normal, how will schools go about reopening, when will that happen? How can we phase in with practices that are safe and that parents can agree to? I think that it's going to be really necessary to think about this as being not a V in terms of, down, hitting the rock bottom of, of how the pandemic has sort of chased us into a corner. Recovery is not going to be, an absolute upward trajectory. It's going to be a longer and slower curve. And so thinking about, for schools and for centers and for businesses, reopening in a phased way and continuing to sort of need to use these practices that have become necessary because of this idea of, really needing to do things in a way that that individuals can agree or accept. And so for schools to reopen, they're going to have to, grapple with the fact that some parents, it may take parents a while to feel safe to return their children to congregate settings where there are larger groups of individuals, where there's more interaction. And so I think that the centers who've remained open and are providing this essential care, even though this is really challenging, and for all the reasons that you described, Ryan and Diane, I think it's actually a really important model and a useful resource and example for thinking about, so how do we build from this and understand what we're learning, where we need to course correct, and then figure out how do we phase, step by step by step on top of that, and get through what is going to, necessarily be a challenging reentry.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just add too, the role of community partners is going to be more important than ever. And all of us who are working at the local level through Smart Beginnings Network, we have those community partners at the ready and at our side, and they care just like you about this issue. And so we will be calling on them to help us continue to build a robust early childhood system that is accessible for families and that meets the needs of our local families based on what's really going on for kids and families.
Do you all see any public policy changes in the Commonwealth in early childhood education that might come out of this as we move forward?
I do, and I think there's, real silver linings, to that. Childcare is actually both a public and a private good. And when we think about, again, it's ironic because the Northam administration and the General Assembly had just passed a funding package and a bill with policy change to really transform. It was something south of $100 million investment in early childhood education and some additional policies or improved policies to really help transform our system. And of course, then, the pandemic enters the scene. And so I think that we want to make sure that we don't lose the chance. Some of that is jeopardized right now. There's a freeze on the funds. But I think that, with, dedicated brains, we can try to figure out how do we still move through this period of time and move toward a transformed system. Some of the policies that I think may change are our state level policy, public policy. I think that also employers and philanthropy and nonprofits and local community leaders will also be looking for, lower P, small p policy and changes that can be made, process and procedural changes that can be made to better support childcare as both a public and a private good. We haven't talked a great deal in this conversation about the importance of quality of those settings. But it really, for childcare to be the double bang for the buck that we need it to be, it's both a work-life support for families, which is the essential. It's also a school readiness mechanism for our next generation. And so we need to make sure that we're holding both of those, essential priorities in mind as we recreate policy for the future.
Speaking of school readiness issue, I guess I wonder, as someone who's listened to, so for example, Mike Petters, the CEO at Huntington Ingalls, talk about early childhood education, Governor Northam, and he's on early childhood education. I wonder what the students who are going through this, what are the long-term effects on the students who aren't in those places where they're getting that socialization and the services that they might need to make sure that they are successful students moving forward, because this is a large gap of time that they have not received. Some of them have not received.
Yeah, for sure.
And we're all talking about that. we have a very strong collective impact effort here through Smart Beginnings Virginia Peninsula, and the working groups in the health arena and the early care and education and thriving families are all talking about the impact of trauma and anxiety that has come with this. You know, we want to keep our kids away from that, but they can sense it through us. And so how will we think to the future to be responsive? We've been talking about the lag in being prepared for all that they'll need to know when they come to kindergarten. And are there innovative solutions that we as a community can put into place now? It's going to help parents have the tools they need to help their kids succeed, even during this time. We've been filling our social media and our website with resources, hoping to reach families and hoping to reach more families in that way as well. It's a lot to think about for young kids and families.
So what does early childhood education look like post-coronavirus 2 years from now? What does it look like? Either one of you can answer that.
Top on my wish list, and then I'll turn it to Diane. I do think that we will see a world where the value of early childhood education is more visible and more recognized. I think we'll see improved policy and changes in terms of more efficient administration and management of these services. That means stronger infrastructure at the state level, more, of a sense of, if you think about child care centers, each as autonomous, sites, if they are more configured like a school system is, where there's an infrastructure and sort of back office support that take care of things like property management and HR and IT, some of the operational facilities, so that the providers can focus on providing high quality care and delivering those services. I think there's a lot of potential for that. I think that also just recognizing that the accountability for ensuring strong, stable, quality care that is both delivered in both public and private settings, and is a mixed delivery system that we need, is going to be there are a number of different stakeholders and constituent groups that have to be at the table in designing the new policies and the new procedures. Just before I turn it to Diane, just kind of a shout out to your region, your community, which really has just shown such exceptional leadership in recognizing these key ingredients for a community and a region's success. And that's coming from, again, your philanthropic sector, your business, amazing leaders like Mike Petters, as well as local community leaders, municipal leaders, and then nonprofits and systems builders like Diane and her efforts in the region. Just hats off to all of you, because that's going to make this really challenging work a lighter lift.
And I would add to that the entire area and the entire state sees early childhood education as important to the entire continuum of a child's life and education, from birth to career, that it be a priority to all of us, that we understand that not just during this time of the pandemic that childcare is essential, but it is always essential, and that early care and education is essential for every worker to be able to do their job, whatever that is. And then the last thing I would say is that we make sure that there is equitable access for all families to early childhood experiences. We still have populations of children and families disproportionately that are not served, and there may be new ways of looking at how to ensure that families access these programs. But we are committed here on the Peninsula through Smart Beginnings and all of our cross-sector partners in business, philanthropy, health, faith, and onward to that equitable access and making early childhood education a priority.
Well, I want to thank you both for joining us today. I appreciate your bringing your insights to the table. I appreciate the work that you do. It's so important to the Commonwealth of Virginia, so thank you for that.
Welcome.
Being here.
Thank you.
So before we go, Diane, if anyone who's watching this wants to reach out and help your organization in some way, how would they contact you?
So our website is the best place, and it's www.smartbeginnings, that's a plural, VP.org. So VP stands for Virginia Peninsula. Thanks for asking.
Absolutely. And Kathy, if they want to learn more about your organization, where would they find that information?
VECF.org,
Excellent.
Virginia Early Childhood Foundation. And again, I want to add my thanks to Diane's for covering this important topic. As you can see, it's important not only to community members and families, but it's an important workforce and economic asset for our state, and we need to pay attention to it, therefore. Thanks so much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Kathy, Diane, thanks so much for being with us today. For those of you watching, we appreciate your attention. We hope this was useful and helpful for you to find out a little more about what's going on in the state during this current crisis. We thank you so much for watching. If you would like, subscribe, etc. Those all help us to continue to do this. We also want to thank the Peninsula Community Foundation of Virginia for helping facilitate this conversation. And for now, that's all. So we will see you next time. Thank you so much.